I'm glad to be here this Sunday at the close of First Unitarian's Lenten series on risk. I have been ministered to by this series, myself, and I am sure that you have as well. By Daniel, who reminds us that sometimes risk chooses us. People who are facing violations to their human rights most certainly know this to be true. Daniel also challenged us about the temptations we feel, including one that resonated with me, the temptation to believe that our small effort will not make a difference. And then Aaron reminded us that even when we can't control things around us, we can choose the heart we carry with us. And Beth said that when we are people of faith and conviction, sometimes we are called on, even perhaps required, to risk radical prophetic love, even though we know that this means that there will be some who ridicule us. We risk ridicule. Well, that's pretty much the sermon I have for you today. I'm not really saying anything new beyond that, but I'm really glad for the opportunity to share some stories from our work, from the work of the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee. Stories that I hope will become a part of the way you see our threads weaving together the world that we long for. Risking hope. In December, I was in San Diego with 400 other faith leaders, part of a witness that we were co-sponsors of, initiated by the American Friends Service Committee, to declare that love knows no borders, and especially to advocate that our borders, against the militarization that is happening at our borders and the way we are using detention as a response to a very difficult situation, a migrant crisis. We joined together to say, love knows no borders. I don't know if you've been there. I was surprised. It was my first time. I was surprised to discover that the wall there between San Diego and Tijuana actually goes a long way into the ocean. The waves and the birds that were soaring above, I felt like they were mocking the wall a little bit. I could almost hear the birds joining us in our chant that love knows no borders. Part of our witness was the opportunity to honor and pay tribute to some who have died making the difficult journey, some who left situations of violence and extreme poverty to make this difficult journey, who have died on the way. And so we stood in the traditional way, listening as names were called out, and with each name, the 400 of us responded, presente. You know this tradition? Would you? Presente. Presente. Since we returned with heavy hearts, we add at least 2 names to the list of those who have lost their lives making the journey. Jacqueline Call, age 7. Felipe Gomez Alonso, age 8. Presente. Between the lesser and the greater evil, choose neither. Between 2 children, choose them both the child from the United States and the child from Guatemala. Between hope and despair, choose hope. It will be harder to bear. I love the poet's challenge to consider our choices. Remember that we are making choices all the time. And then he says, hope will be harder to bear. He's telling us it's a risk. We're taking a chance. But I find it a little confusing Because you know what? I have to tell you, I am tempted by despair, and it feels pretty hard to bear. Shortly after I began work at the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, we gathered 40 faith leaders from around the country to Ajo, Arizona. And there we learned about the brutal conditions that many in Central America are facing, causing some to choose to leave their homes and make the journey of migration. And also we learned about the way our government has weaponized the desert as a deterrent to migration. Our government for many years restricting access to the border in safer places to push the flow of migrants through the deadly terrain of the desert. This is actually documented that this was a strategy for deterring migration, deterrence by death. Last year, the remains of 128 people who died making the journey were discovered, and many times that number are reported missing, but have not been found. I don't know how we don't despair when deadly deterrence is policy. Our group walked only a half a mile into the desert that morning, and at first glance, I think we probably looked a little silly with our clerical garb. We were there to make a witness, to stand in solidarity with the volunteers who have been targeted for their humanitarian work. We were also there to try to help, leaving water between us, leaving 125 gallons of water in the desert in hopes that it might help someone survive. A piece of our work, this direct assistance that has a chance of helping one person survive as part of the larger body of our work that works to change systems so that no one will have to make a journey like that. When they told us they hoped we would carry 2 gallons of water each, I did a little calculation and thought, I'll probably be fine. But then I realized that I wasn't going to drink any of that water, so I needed more than 2 gallons of water, even for the mile that I was walking. So I managed with 1 gallon in my backpack and another large water bottle to drink from, and then I held 1 gallon and another smaller water bottle. All of the water I brought for myself, I consumed on that brief time in the desert. The water bottles that we left were all marked with love notes in Spanish. We see you. We want you to survive. Our nation is more than enforcement and deadly deterrence. The heat was a physical assault, reaching 110 degrees by noon. And by the end of my mere 2 hours in the desert, it was clear to me in my body how dangerous it would be to walk for longer in the desert. Just a couple of weeks ago, some of us were in Mexico City visiting with some of UUSC's partners there, and we had the opportunity to meet some people, many of whom had migrated to Mexico and were seeking asylum there, some of whom were making their way farther north. And we asked them, why did you leave? And person after person described circumstances, explained to us that really they didn't have any choice at all, that the dangerous journey was the only hope they could imagine for their safety and the well-being of their families. How do we not despair when our leaders are lying about so much related to Central American migration? We went to Ajo at the request of UUSC's partner, No More Deaths. They asked us to organize faith leaders to show up in solidarity with their volunteers who have been criminally charged for leaving water in the desert. Could I have a gasp? Something? Criminally charged for leaving water in the desert, for providing humanitarian relief. We shouldn't be surprised. We're seeing this happen all over the world. that humanitarian assistance, humanitarian workers being targeted as part of an effort to dismantle asylum in Hungary, in Italy, in the United States. In the No More Deaths case, 9 volunteers were charged, 8 on misdemeanor charges of driving without a permit in a wilderness area, of leaving behind materials in a wilderness area. In January, 4 of those volunteers were found guilty. Public attention has been gaining momentum over these last months, I'm glad to say. And the next 4 to see the judge actually didn't even make it to the courtroom because the charges were dropped. And they agreed to a period of time of unsupervised probation. So the momentum feels good, and yet we are awaiting the trial of one of the other volunteers who is facing 2 felony charges and the possibility of 20 years in prison for harboring and feeding a migrant. How do we not despair when humanitarian assistance is considered a crime? No More Deaths has reported that this surveillance and this targeting actually happened at the same time that No More Deaths, the volunteers, were exposing the practice of federal agents in the desert of emptying the water that they were leaving. They actually got film evidence, video evidence of this practice. And it was the day that that video went viral that Scott Morn was charged. How do we not despair when officers of the law are committing inhumane acts in the line of duty? Earlier this month, our board met in Tucson, and we got to hear from Parker Deegan, one of the volunteers who was charged. She was awaiting her hearing. She was one of the 4 whose charges were dropped. But she was remarking on the irony of the charge. She has been a conservationist for her whole life, an activist in conservation, and so being charged under the Protecting of National Wildlife Refuge was a tremendous and painful irony to her. In a piece she wrote for CNN, she offered this hope. She said, "Someday I hope to walk out into the wilderness in southern Arizona without the fear that I will encounter someone in distress, with the body of someone we were too late to help. I hope to walk out without helicopters circling overhead and armed agents driving past. I hope one day to feel at peace again in the beauty of the Sonoran Desert." How do we not despair? How do we not choose despair? I do think they want this, though. I think the forces of hate and division want this. They want us to be discouraged and afraid. They know that our discouragement will lead us to resign ourselves to all that's wrong. They know that when we choose despair, that leads to our sense of powerlessness. In Alaska in October, UUSC brought together our partners from around the world who are First Nation and Indigenous leaders facing the immediate effects of climate change, communities losing their homes to rising waters. The first day, a representative from each of the groups there, folks from the South Pacific, from Alaska, from Bangladesh, Louisiana, Washington State, each of the communities represented told their story, the challenges they're facing, the creative solutions they're discovering, the heartbreak of being in the position of losing their connection with the land that they call home, that defines so much of who they are, their identity, their families, their history, and what they had hoped would be their future. It was heartbreaking hearing their stories. But as I listened, I realized these are people who don't have time to despair. They boldly acknowledge that the solutions needed would arise from that room, that their traditional wisdom is needed as we face climate change on this planet together. And they asked us, they said, we need you to be a partner, and we need other partners to help us find our place, claim our place at the table as we are seeking solutions together. This kind of partnership, this kind of joining together from perspectives around the world is part of the great power that is possible in our work. And it is a tremendous privilege in our day-to-day work at UUSC to witness leaders and activists who choose hope. As I think of them, I do begin to understand what the poet is trying to tell us, that hope is hard to bear because it always comes with heartbreak. Hope is harder because it leaves our hearts open and vulnerable. It means I can't turn my back. I can't walk away. And it means that my heart will be broken over and over and over again. Despair diminishes us. Despair creates hardened hearts. And a hardened heart doesn't have to bear anything. A hardened heart doesn't have to do anything. Hope is a choice that requires discipline and practice and faith. And that is why I am a Unitarian Universalist, and that is why I came to church this morning. I knew that arriving here, I would meet you and hear your story. I knew that you would have courage I could borrow, stories of courage. I have found that hope here this morning and this weekend as I've learned more about what's happening in this congregation. Your pledge to end racism, the work you are doing in climate justice, Daniel's work just this weekend with others, carrying forward the legacy, the great legacy of this congregation in reproductive justice work. And this wonderful work that is developing here in partnership with the larger community to reduce teen pregnancy in Dallas County. Thank you. Thank you for giving me hope. And I hope that you will go home today with a little hope from UUSC. My greatest source of hope these days are our partners. I have seen the broken heart and the brave hope of feminist leaders in Central America who risk their lives by exposing violence and impunity. I've seen the broken heart and brave hope of a community in Haiti, some of you have met them, who built eco-villages out of nothing. The brave, broken heart and brave hope of women in Nicaragua who are demanding safety at home and in their streets, and journalists in Honduras who are exposing their government's cruel policy and violent retributions at great personal risk. These are just a few of UUSC's partners who give me hope. If you are feeling that temptation to despair, if you are in need of some hope today, I hope you will also find it in the work of our Unitarian Universalist Service Committee. It won't be easy. The things that really matter never are. Unitarian Universalist values and aspiration offer a vision of a world transformed by love and justice, and we are here for nothing less than this. Are you here for less than that? Daniel says sometimes risk chooses us. And the temptation to believe that what we do will not make a difference is a dangerous temptation. Beth reminds us that when we are people of conviction and faith, sometimes we are required to risk radical and prophetic love, knowing that there are some who will ridicule us for our conviction and our faith. And Aaron, says even when we can't control the things around us, we can choose the kind of heart we carry with us. Risking broken hearts, we will find hope. They might call it a crime. They might pass laws that criminalize our values and our work for justice. They will tempt us with despair, with disregard, and with hate. But today, especially today, this first day of Holy Week, may we choose to carry hearts touched by hope. May we risk hope. And if we are charged, let us be found guilty. Amen.